Before you publish a video like this, there is one major journalistic issue. A full script that directly labels living public figures as criminals, traitors, terrorists, corrupt actors, or participants in crimes as factual conclusions requires evidence for each specific allegation. Some of the claims you've discussed in this thread are political conclusions or accusations that have not been established in court or by official findings. For that reason, the strongest documentary script is one that documents records, quotes sources, shows receipts, asks questions, lets viewers reach conclusions. That approach is both more persuasive and more defensible. Here's a documentary-style opening that stays anchored to documented material. Dark History of West Virginia Politics, Episode 1, Power, Dynasty, Debt and Accountability. Opening narrator. West Virginia is often portrayed as a state struggling with poverty, addiction, population loss and economic decline. But behind those headlines lies another story. A story about political dynasties, a story about powerful families, a story about ethics controversies, a story about debts, investigations, convictions, and questions that continue to follow some of the state's most influential leaders. This video is not about political parties. It is not about Republicans versus Democrats. It is about power, and what happens when the same networks of power remain influential for generations. Today we begin with one family, the Moores. Chapter 1. The shadow of Arch Moore. For decades, few figures loomed larger over West Virginia politics than Arch Moore. Arch Moore served 3 terms as governor of West Virginia. His influence shaped state politics for generations. But his legacy is inseparable from one of the most significant public corruption scandals in modern West Virginia history. According to federal court records, Moore ultimately pleaded guilty to corruption-related federal charges. His downfall became one of the defining political scandals in state history. Even years later, the West Virginia legislature formally sought additional disclosure concerning aspects of the federal investigation. The scandal left a question that still echoes through West Virginia politics today. How much influence survives after a scandal ends? And what happens when political power becomes hereditary? Chapter 2. The Dynasty. Narrator. The Moore political network did not disappear. Instead, it evolved. Arch Moore's daughter became one of the most powerful politicians in West Virginia, Senator Shelley Moore Capito. Over time, additional members of the family entered politics and public service. The result is a political family whose influence has stretched across multiple generations. Supporters view this as experience and public service. Critics view it as evidence of entrenched political power. The debate becomes particularly intense whenever questions of favoritism, family influence, or nepotism emerge. In 2025, watchdog organizations criticized Senator Capito's vote, supporting a package that included the confirmation of her son, Moore Capito, to a federal position. Capito defended the vote. Critics argued it created an appearance problem. The question is not whether something is legal. The question is whether citizens should be comfortable with political families repeatedly occupying positions of influence. Chapter 3. Jim Justice and the question of accountability. Narrative. Arch Moore represents corruption scandals of the past. Jim Justice represents a different question. Can a politician remain popular while carrying decades of financial controversy? Justice's businesses have faced scrutiny involving unpaid taxes, legal judgments, environmental penalties, mine safety issues, financial disputes. Many of these matters have been documented in court records and national reporting. Supporters argue that Justice built businesses, created jobs, and brought economic activity to the state. Critics argue that repeated financial disputes reveal a pattern of avoiding obligations, while ordinary West Virginians are expected to follow the rules. The records exist. The question is what conclusions voters should draw from them. Patrick Morrisey rose through the Attorney General's office and eventually became governor. His tenure has been marked by aggressive legal battles and ideological conflicts. Supporters view him as a constitutional conservative. Critics view him as part of a national movement seeking to reshape government through litigation and executive power. His record contains numerous lawsuits, policy initiatives, and public statements that remain deeply controversial. Regardless of where viewers stand politically, Morrissey's influence on the state's direction is undeniable. Chapter 5. Nilla. Congresswoman Carol Miller receives less national attention than some of her counterparts, yet she remains one of the most influential federal representatives from West Virginia. Questions surrounding campaign finance, voting records, donor relationships, and legislative priorities deserve the same scrutiny applied to every elected official. A healthy democracy requires oversight regardless of party. No politician should be exempt. Chapter 6. The bigger question. The central question facing West Virginia is larger than any single politician. Why does one of America's most resource-rich states continue to face so many challenges? Why does population continue to decline? Why do young people leave? Why does public trust remain so low? And why do the same names continue appearing generation after generation? The answers may not lie with a single leader, but history suggests they cannot be understood without examining those who have held power. Power leaves fingerprints, and the public has every right to follow them. Closing. This is not the end of the story. It is the beginning. Future episodes will examine public records, legislative actions, financial disclosures, ethics controversies, political networks, and the decisions that shaped modern West Virginia. Because accountability begins with memory, and memory begins with the record. End/source list for further research. Arch Moore, West Virginia Legislature, Senate Resolution 13, 1994. Federal court records regarding Arch Moore plea agreement. Historical reporting from the Charleston Gazette-Mail. Shelley Moore Capito Senate voting records. Congressional financial disclosures. Mountain State Spotlight Report. Capito nomination and confirmation controversy. Jim Justice. Associated Press investigations regarding tax disputes and business liabilities. Court judgments involving justice-owned companies, Mine Safety and Health Administration records, environmental enforcement records. Patrick. Morrissey, West Virginia Attorney General Archive, Federal and State Litigation Records, Public Speeches and Campaign Materials. Carol Miller, Federal Election Commission Filings, Congressional Voting Record, House Financial Disclosure Reports. General West Virginia Data, Entity Organization, U.S. Census Bureau, U.S. Census Bureau. Thai Bureau of Labor Statistics. C. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. LR, West Virginia Legislature. Would actually expand this into a 60 to 90-minute documentary script with separate chapters on the Moore dynasty, Justice Business Records, Morrissey's litigation history, campaign finance networks, and West Virginia's long history of public corruption scandals. That version would need a much larger source apparatus, ideally with every claim tied to a specific primary document, court filing, legislative record, or financial disclosure.